Good morning. My name is Sarah. Can you understand me? Is this your family? Where you lived?
You have children.
I'm sorry.
I'm 62 years old now, and for the last 37 years, I've carried a secret so disturbing that even speaking it aloud makes my hands shake. In November of 1987, deep in the Tongass National Forest of southeastern Alaska, I discovered something that destroyed everything I thought I knew about nature, about death, and about what truly hides in the darkest corners of our world. My name is Daniel Graves, and I'm a wildlife biologist who spent most of his career studying decomposition patterns in large mammals for the U.S. Forest Service. The work was solitary, methodical, sometimes unpleasant, but it was honest science. I documented how bears, moose, and elk broke down after death, how ecosystems reclaimed their nutrients, how life fed on death in an endless cycle. I thought I'd seen everything decay could show me. I was wrong. What I found rotting in those woods wasn't just another dead animal. It was proof of an intelligence that had been watching us, hiding from us, dying silently among the trees while we pretended they didn't exist. And what was growing inside that massive, decomposing body would change my understanding of biology, evolution, and the terrible price these creatures pay for their invisibility. The air that November morning tasted like iron and wet earth, thick with the smell of early winter pressing down on the forest. I'd been tracking a reported grizzly kill for 3 days, following a trail of disturbed undergrowth and scattered fur through terrain so remote that my nearest human contact was 40 miles behind me. The silence out there wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, expectant, like the forest itself was holding its breath. My radio crackled with static, useless this far from any relay tower. The GPS unit in my pack was my only connection to the mapped world. And even that felt tenuous, a fragile thread of technology stretched across wilderness that had existed long before satellites circled overhead. I'd camped the previous night near a creek that fed into one of the countless unnamed tributaries braiding through the Tongass, and at dawn, I'd noticed something wrong with the air. There was a smell, subtle at first, that made my stomach tighten with professional recognition: decay. But not the sharp, almost sweet rot of a fresh bear kill or the earthy dissolution of an old moose carcass. This was different, heavier, more complex, wrong. I followed the scent upstream, my boots squelching in moss so thick it absorbed sound like a living carpet. The spruce and hemlock grew dense here, their branches interlocking overhead to create a perpetual twilight even in midday. Fungus bloomed in impossible colors on fallen logs, luminescent greens and purples that seemed to pulse with their own light in the shadows. Every 50 yards or so I'd stop, listening, letting my senses catalog the space around me. That's when I started noticing the trees. Several massive spruces had been marked, bark stripped away and vertical gouges that ran from ground level up to heights of 8, maybe 9 feet. The wood underneath was weathered, old, but the pattern was deliberate. Territorial markers, I thought initially. Bears did this, but the spacing was wrong, the height excessive, even for the largest Kodiak. And there was something else. Arranged at the base of one marked tree was a cairn of river stones, each roughly the size of my fist, stacked with impossible precision into a pyramidal structure about 3 feet tall. I crouched beside it, professional curiosity overriding the first whisper of unease. This wasn't natural. Animals didn't stack stones. Even the most tool-using species, the most intelligent primates and corvids, didn't build geometric structures like this in the wild. My hands hovered over the cairn, but didn't touch it. Some instinct, some primitive part of my brain that still remembered when humans were prey, told me that touching this would be crossing a boundary I didn't understand. I photographed it instead, the flash of my camera obscenely bright in the gloom, and then I moved on, following the smell that grew stronger with each step. The creek narrowed ahead, forcing its way between 2 moss-covered boulders the size of cars, and beyond that natural gate, the smell hit me like a physical wall. I'd smelled death my entire career, had stood knee-deep in putrefying elk, had documented the bacterial bloom of decay in countless mammals. But this was different. This smelled ancient, wrong. Like something that should have decomposed months ago but hadn't. Like biology itself was struggling with what to do with whatever was rotting ahead of me. I pushed through a curtain of Devil's Club, the thorns catching on my jacket, and entered a small clearing where the canopy opened just enough to let in thin November light. And there, collapsed against the massive root system of a fallen spruce, was something that made my brain refuse to process what my eyes were seeing. It was enormous, even in death. Even partially collapsed in on itself with advanced decomposition, it was at least 8 feet long, maybe more. The body lay on its side, one arm stretched out ahead as if reaching for something, the other bent underneath at an angle that suggested final agony. It was covered in hair, thick matted fur that had been dark brown or black, but was now mottled with the white and green of fungal growth. The smell was overwhelming. A thick soup of rot that coated my throat and made my eyes water. But it was the shape that froze me in place. The proportions, the 2 long arms, the massive shoulders, the skull visible where decomposition had pulled back the flesh of the face, revealing heavy brow ridges and a sagittal crest that no known North American primate should possess. A Bigfoot, a real, dead, rotting Bigfoot. Every scientific protocol I'd ever learned screamed at me to document this, to photograph from multiple angles, to collect samples, to mark the GPS coordinates and call for backup even though my radio was useless. But I couldn't move. I stood there, maybe for 30 seconds, maybe for 5 minutes, just staring at proof that something impossible was real and had died alone in this forgotten corner of the world. The sound that broke my paralysis was small, almost beneath hearing, a wet, organic sound, like something moving inside the carcass. My body reacted before my conscious mind caught up, my hand flying to the bear spray on my hip, even though whatever made that sound was clearly inside something dead. The movement came again, a visible disturbance in the creature's distended abdomen, the fur rippling slightly as something beneath the skin shifted. Decomposition gases, I told myself, just pressure building up inside the body cavity. It happens, it's normal. Except it wasn't. The movement was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Something was alive inside that corpse. My training finally kicked in, overriding the shock. I circled the body slowly, keeping 10 feet back, photographing from every angle my shaking hands could manage. The creature's face, partially decomposed, still held an expression I could only describe as anguish. Its eyes were long gone, the sockets empty, but the set of the jaw, the position of the skull, spoke of pain. Whatever this being was, it had suffered before death. I noted everything with automatic precision, male, judging by the overall size and musculature visible beneath the decay. Age difficult to determine, but the dental wear visible in the partially exposed jaw suggested mature adulthood. Cause of death not immediately apparent, no obvious wounds or trauma, no signs of predation. The body was remarkably intact, suggesting death had occurred perhaps 4 to 6 weeks prior, maybe longer, given the cold temperatures that would slow decomposition. It was when I circled toward the head that I saw them, symbols, carved into the massive spruce that the creature had died against. Not random marks or natural patterns, but deliberate symbols, cut deep into the bark with something sharp. They formed a rough circle, maybe 3 feet in diameter, positioned directly behind where the creature's head would have rested in its final moments. I'd never seen anything like them. They weren't pictographs, weren't any indigenous art form I recognized from my years in Alaska. They were geometric, precise, angular in ways that suggested language or meaning beyond decoration. And they were fresh. The exposed wood was still light-colored, not yet weathered. Someone or something had carved these recently, perhaps even while the creature was dying. As I stood there trying to make sense of the symbols, the movement in the corpse's abdomen came again, more vigorous this time. The entire midsection seemed to pulse, the skin stretching visibly before relaxing. That wasn't gas. That was something alive, something feeding inside the body. My mind raced through possibilities. Maggots, beetles, any number of insects that colonize corpses. but November in Southeast Alaska was too cold for most decomposers to be this active. Whatever was inside there was larger. I did something then that violated every protocol, every boundary of professional distance I'd ever maintained. I moved closer, step by step, fighting my instincts. I approached the carcass until I was close enough to see the individual hairs matted with decay, close enough to make out the incredible detail of the hands, those massive hands that were so eerily human despite their size. The fingernails were thick, almost claw-like, but the structure underneath was unmistakably a hand, not a paw. 5 digits, opposable thumb, palm pads that suggested a grip capable of fine manipulation. This was a tool user. This was an intelligence. The sound came again from inside the abdomen, and this time I saw it clearly. Something was pushing against the inside of the body wall, distorting the flesh from within. Not insects. Too large, too deliberate. Something was trying to get out. I knelt beside the corpse, my gloved hand hovering over the distended stomach. I should leave, I thought. I should mark this location, hike back to civilization, return with a team and proper equipment. I should not be doing what I was about to do, but I reached into my pack anyway, pulled out my field knife, a simple 4-inch blade I used for cutting rope and processing samples, and I pressed the tip against the stretched skin of the creature's abdomen. The smell that erupted when I made the first cut was beyond anything I'd experienced. Not just decay, but something else, something chemical and organic at once, like spoiled meat mixed with mushrooms and wet earth, and something almost metallic. I gagged, fought down vomit, and kept cutting, opening a careful incision about 6 inches long through skin and muscle that had softened with rot. The flesh parted easily, too easily, and something inside moved with sudden violence. I stumbled backward as a shape forced its way through the opening I'd created, something pale and glistening with fluids, something that shouldn't exist. It was a mushroom, not tiny decomposer fungi, not the normal molds that colonize dead tissue. This was a massive fruiting body, its cap easily the size of a dinner plate, pure white, except for veins of darker tissue that pulsed with something that looked almost like circulation. It pushed through the opening, followed by another and another, a cascade of fungal growth tumbling out of the corpse's body cavity in a grotesque parody of birth. They moved, not with muscular contraction, but with some kind of internal pressure, with hydraulic force that made them extend and grow even as I watched, feeding on the body from the inside out. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I was watching something that defied every principle of mycology I'd ever studied. Fungi didn't grow this fast, didn't produce fruiting bodies this large, didn't move with such apparent purpose, and yet here they were, erupting from the corpse of an impossible creature, spreading across the forest floor with white tendrils that seemed to seek and probe the ground beneath them. Within minutes, the entire area around the body was covered in fungal growth, a carpet of pale mycelium that connected the mushrooms in a visible network. And that's when I noticed the pattern. The fungi weren't growing randomly. They were forming shapes, rough circles and lines that echoed the symbols carved into the tree. They were organizing themselves into deliberate geometry. I forced myself to document this, my hands shaking so badly that half the photos I took would turn out blurred. I collected samples, carefully cutting pieces of the fruiting bodies and sealing them in specimen bags, numbering each one, maintaining the practiced routine of fieldwork because it was the only thing keeping me from complete panic. The fungi had a texture unlike any mushroom I'd touched before. They were cool, almost cold, and when I cut into them, a clear fluid oozed out that made my gloved fingertips tingle even through the latex. The body itself, now relieved of the pressure from the fungal mass, had partially collapsed, revealing more of the internal cavity. I should not have looked inside. I should have maintained professional distance, should have respected the sanctity of death, even for an unknown species. But I looked anyway, shining my flashlight into the dark interior of the corpse. The organs were gone, not decomposed, but gone, replaced entirely by fungal mycelia that had invaded every space, every cavity, turning the creature's insides into a substrate for alien growth. The ribs were visible, massive curving bones that would have enclosed a chest cavity capable of supporting phenomenal lung capacity. And wrapped around those ribs, growing through them, incorporating them into its structure, was more of the white fungal network. It had colonized the skeleton itself, was breaking down bone, turning the very foundation of the creature's body into food for its own reproduction. This wasn't normal decomposition. This was something else entirely. The fungi weren't just consuming the corpse, they were integrating it, using it, transforming it into part of their own structure. I'd never seen anything like this in nature. Parasitic fungi existed, certainly. Cordyceps species that took over insects, root rots that killed trees, but this was different. This was too complex, too organized, too deliberately geometric in its growth pattern. I worked for another hour, documenting everything, collecting samples, measuring the rate of fungal expansion with a series of timed photographs. The growth was accelerating. Within 60 minutes, the mycelial network had extended 20 feet in all directions from the corpse, covering fallen logs, climbing up tree trunks, spreading with purpose toward the symbols carved into the spruce. And when the leading edge of the fungal growth reached those symbols, something extraordinary happened. The mushrooms nearest the carved bark began to change color. The pure white flesh took on hues of pale blue and violet, patterns of color that pulsed and flowed through the mycelial network like signals passing through neurons. The fungus was reacting to the symbols, or reading them, or responding to them in some way I couldn't begin to comprehend. The temperature was dropping as afternoon faded toward evening, and I knew I needed to leave, to get back to camp before dark, to process what I'd found before I lost perspective entirely. But I couldn't tear myself away from the sight of those color patterns rippling through the fungal network. Couldn't stop watching as the mushrooms nearest the symbols grew taller, their caps opening and releasing clouds of spores into the still air. Those spores caught the fading light, glittering like snow, drifting on currents invisible to my eyes, settling on every surface, including my jacket and exposed skin, despite my attempts to avoid them. I collected one final sample, cutting a section of the mycelium that had incorporated a piece of the creature's rib bone, and then I forced myself to step back, to leave the clearing while I still could. But before I went, I did something that still haunts me. I approached the creature's head, or what remained of it. That massive skull partially emerged from decay, and I placed my hand on what would have been its forehead. The bone was cold beneath my palm, solid and real, despite how impossible the entire situation was. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I didn't know why I felt the need to apologize or what exactly I was apologizing for. Sorry that you died alone out here? Sorry that I'd violated your body in the name of science? Sorry that your entire species lived in hiding, in fear, dying in forgotten places where no one would know or care? The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. As I turned to leave the clearing, I noticed one more thing. Scattered around the clearing, partially hidden by the fungal growth, but still visible, were objects, tools. A carefully worked stone, its edge napped into a crude but functional blade. A length of carved wood that might have been a digging implement or walking stick. A woven container made from strips of cedar bark, the craftsmanship evident despite its weathered condition. This creature had possessed culture, technology, the capacity for tool-making and symbolic thought. And it had died here surrounded by its possessions, with symbols carved overhead, as alone as any human who ever breathed their last in isolation. The hike back to my camp took twice as long as it should have. The November darkness came early this far north, and I stumbled through the forest with only my flashlight to guide me, my mind replaying everything I'd seen, trying to make sense of what shouldn't be possible. When I finally reached my tent, I sealed all my samples in plastic bags, documented everything in my field journal with shaking handwriting, and sat awake until dawn, staring at the notes I'd taken, trying to decide what to do with this information. The official protocols were clear. Any significant wildlife discovery was to be reported immediately through channels to the regional office. But this wasn't just a significant discovery. This was proof of an undocumented higher primate in North America, a species that had somehow escaped scientific notice for centuries, that possessed intelligence and culture and technology. Revealing this would bring researchers, media, curiosity seekers, all of them converging on the Tongass to search for more specimens, more proof. The remaining population, if there was one, would be driven deeper into hiding or hunted to extinction. I thought about those carved symbols, about the carefully stacked stones, about the evidence of grief and isolation in that creature's final resting place. And I made a decision that would define the next 37 years of my life. I would not report this, not officially, not through channels that would lead to exposure and exploitation. The next morning, I broke camp and hiked out, carrying my samples and my secret. When I reached the ranger station and filed my report, I described finding an unusual predation site, documented the location as scientifically uninteresting, and moved on to my next assignment. The samples stayed locked in my freezer at home. The photographs stayed in a safety deposit box. The knowledge stayed locked inside my skull, eating at me, demanding to be shared, to be verified, to be studied, but never released. I spent the next 5 years analyzing those samples in secret, using equipment at the university where I held an adjunct position, running tests during late nights and early mornings when no one would question what I was doing. The results only deepened the mystery. The fungus was unlike any known species. Its DNA contained sequences that suggested both terrestrial and possibly more ancient origins, genetic material that didn't match anything in existing databases. It was extraordinarily aggressive in its consumption of tissue, breaking down complex proteins with enzymes that no known decomposer produced. And it was intelligent, not conscious in any way I could define, but the mycelial network showed patterns of information transfer, of decision-making, of coordinated response to stimuli that suggested something more than simple chemical reactions. Under laboratory conditions, when I grew samples of the fungus on various substrates, it would always organize itself into geometric patterns. Always. No matter what I grew it on, it formed circles and lines and angular shapes that echoed those symbols carved into the tree. It was responding to something, some signal or pattern in its own genetic code that made it express information through shape. The most disturbing discovery came when I tested the fungus on primate tissue samples. I obtained small samples of human tissue, legally, from medical waste with proper permissions, and introduced the fungal spores. The colonization was rapid, aggressive, and showed a clear preference for neural tissue. The fungus grew fastest in brain tissue, its mycelium following neural pathways, infiltrating synapses, replacing human cells with its own structure while maintaining the architectural organization of the brain it was consuming. It was as if the fungus learned from what it consumed, as if it incorporated information from its host into its own structure. That's when I understood what I'd really found in that clearing, that Bigfoot hadn't just died of natural causes, it had been consumed from within by an intelligent parasitic fungus, a creature that had colonized its body, eaten its brain, replaced its thoughts with fungal intelligence, and then used its death as an opportunity for reproduction. Those symbols carved into the tree, those weren't made by the dying creature. They were made by the fungus, expressing information it had absorbed from the host's brain, translating neural patterns into physical marks that other fungal colonies could interpret. The implications terrified me. If this fungus infected other members of the Bigfoot population, it could explain so much. Why they avoided humans so completely. They'd learned through bitter experience that contact meant death, meant infection, meant having their intelligence consumed and replaced by alien thought. Why they were so rare, scattered across vast territories in isolated family groups, they were trying to avoid spreading the infection among themselves. Why no bodies were ever found. The fungus consumed them completely, leaving nothing but geometric patterns and mystery in clearings no one ever visited. And if the fungus could jump species, If it could infect humans the way it infected its natural host, then I was carrying something in my samples that represented an existential threat to human consciousness itself. I spent weeks after that discovery deciding what to do. Burning the samples would be the safest option, destroying all evidence, forgetting what I'd found, letting that secret rot in the Tongass along with its host. But the scientist in me, the part that had spent a career documenting the truth about nature, no matter how unpleasant, couldn't do it. This knowledge mattered. This discovery, however terrifying, represented a fundamental truth about the hidden biology of our world. So I compromised. I preserved everything, but told no one. I continued my normal work, studying normal decomposition in normal animals, while the secrets festered in my home freezer and my memory. The next time I returned to that clearing was 2 years later, in summer of 1989. I'd thought about the site constantly, wondered what had happened to the fungal growth, whether the body had been fully consumed, whether any trace remained of what I'd found. Getting there required 3 days of hiking, but I remembered the route, remembered every landmark, every stream crossing, every marking that would guide me back to that impossible place. The forest had changed. Summer growth had covered much of what I remembered, but the massive spruce with the symbols was unmistakable, its carved surface now weathered and partially overgrown with moss. I approached the tree with my heart hammering, not knowing what I'd find. The clearing was empty. No bones, no decomposing tissue, no trace of the massive corpse that should have left some remnant even after 2 years. The ground was covered in normal forest undergrowth, ferns and moss and young spruce seedlings, but the pattern was wrong. When I looked at the clearing from above, from a small rise that let me see the whole space, I could make out shapes in how the vegetation grew. Circles and lines and geometric forms created by variations in plant growth, by species that thrived in some areas and not others. The fungus was still there, underground, its mycelial network permeating the soil, affecting which plants could grow where, organizing the entire clearing into information-bearing patterns that only made sense from a high enough perspective. I spent that day mapping the patterns, documenting the variations in plant growth, collecting soil samples from different areas. The mycelium was present throughout the clearing, a vast underground network that had replaced or integrated with the normal mycorrhizal fungi that help trees communicate and share nutrients. It had become part of the forest's foundation, invisible but present, shaping growth and decay in ways that normal observers would never notice. That night, camped at the edge of the clearing, I dreamed of networks, of fungal intelligence spreading through dark soil, of information encoded in mycelial pathways, of ancient conversations carried on through chemical signals and geometric patterns no human language could translate. I dreamed of the Bigfoot who had died here, of its thoughts being consumed and read by alien intelligence, of its memories spreading through the fungal network to be preserved in patterns that would last longer than any gravestone. When I woke, there was a new symbol carved into a tree at the edge of my campsite. Fresh cuts in the bark, forming a pattern I'd never seen before. Something had been here while I slept, had watched me, had left a message I couldn't read. That was the last time I ever returned to that clearing. The years that followed were a slow descent into obsession and isolation. I continued my work with the Forest Service, maintained my cover as a normal biologist studying normal things, but privately, I searched. I requested assignments in remote areas, used my access to wilderness reports and ranger observations to track any unusual sightings or unexplained events. I was looking for more evidence, more bodies, more proof that the fungus was out there, spreading, consuming, transforming its hosts into something between living and dead. I found traces everywhere once I knew how to look. Geometric patterns in tree growth, clearings where vegetation formed impossible shapes, reports of strange symbols carved into bark in areas too remote for human visitors, clusters of fungal growth that appeared and disappeared according to patterns I couldn't predict. The fungus was widespread, had been for longer than I'd been alive, had probably been in these forests for centuries or millennia, a hidden intelligence that fed on death and transformed consciousness into pattern. And the Bigfoot population was dying, not from hunting or habitat loss, though those pressures existed too, but from within, consumed by an infection they couldn't fight, their numbers dwindling year by year as the fungus spread through their scattered communities. By the mid-90s, I documented enough circumstantial evidence to fill 3 filing cabinets in my home office, maps covered in pins marking unusual events, photographs of carved symbols from dozens of sites across Alaska, British Columbia, and the Pacific Northwest, tissue samples from suspected infection sites, carefully labeled and frozen, never tested because testing them required facilities and permissions I didn't have. I'd become a conspiracy theorist, except the conspiracy was real, was natural, was a fundamental truth about hidden biology that no one else would ever believe. My career suffered. Colleagues noticed my distraction, my tendency to volunteer for the most remote assignments, my obsession with dead things and decomposition beyond what the work required. I was passed over for promotions, sidelined into marginal positions, tolerated rather than respected. But I couldn't stop. The knowledge wouldn't let me stop. Somewhere out there, more of them were dying, consumed from within, their intelligence harvested by a fungus that was either the most sophisticated parasitic organism on Earth or something else entirely, something that had learned to read minds by eating brains, to preserve consciousness by replacing it with its own structure. The ethical implications paralyzed me. Should I reveal what I knew? The scientific establishment would demand proof, would organize expeditions, would inevitably capture specimens, alive or dead, would study them in laboratories until the last secrets of their biology were exposed to public view. The remaining population would be destroyed in the name of understanding them. But staying silent meant watching an entire species slide toward extinction while a parasitic intelligence consumed them from within. It meant knowing that human contact, human presence, had somehow accelerated the spread of the infection, that our expansion into their territories was driving them into proximity with each other and with the fungus that killed them. Every time I heard reports of Bigfoot sightings, of blurry photographs and ambiguous footprints, I wondered if I was looking at the last members of a dying species, at intelligence being slowly replaced by alien thought. The fungus haunted my dreams. I'd see those pure white mushrooms erupting from impossible places, see geometric patterns forming in the neural tissue of sleeping humans, see mycelial networks spreading beneath cities. Waiting, I'd wake gasping, convinced that I'd been infected during those hours I spent in the clearing, that my thoughts were slowly being consumed and replaced, that everything I believed was my own consciousness was really just fungal intelligence reading my memories and masquerading as me. I tested myself obsessively, drew blood, examined tissue samples, looked for any sign of colonization, found nothing. But how would I know? If the fungus consumed thought while preserving memory, would I recognize my own transformation? Would I notice as my neurons were replaced, one by one, with fungal structures that perfectly mimicked their function? The paranoia nearly destroyed me. By 2000, I was barely functional. My marriage fallen apart years earlier, my career reduced to filing reports no one read, my life consumed by a secret I could neither reveal nor forget. That's when I met Sarah Chen, a mycologist working on fungal communication networks in forest ecosystems. We met at a conference, one of the rare professional gatherings I still attended, and her presentation on how mycelial networks transmitted information between trees sparked something in me. After her talk, I approached her with a hypothetical question. If a fungus could colonize neural tissue, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, could it preserve the information encoded in those neurons? Could it read thoughts? She looked at me strangely, probably sensing the intensity behind the question, but she answered seriously. Theoretically, yes, she said. Mycelial networks already demonstrate information processing, decision-making, even what some researchers call memory. If a fungus evolved to specialize in neural tissue colonization, it could potentially access and preserve the neural patterns it consumed. But no known species does this. None that we know of, I said. None that we've studied, she agreed. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Why? Have you found something? I should have walked away. Should have maintained the silence I'd kept for 13 years. Should have protected the secret that protected the dying species. But I was tired. Tired of carrying the weight alone. Tired of the paranoia and isolation. Tired of being the only person on Earth who knew this truth. So I told her. Not everything, not at first. Just enough to convey that I'd found evidence of an unknown fungal species with unusual properties, that I had samples, that I needed help analyzing them properly. We met a week later at her lab, and I brought the samples I'd kept frozen since 1987. When she looked at them under the microscope, I watched her expression change from professional interest to confusion to something like awe. "This is," she began, then stopped. "This shouldn't exist. These cellular structures. This is organized like neural tissue, but it's fungal. It's both. It's neither." We spent 6 months analyzing those samples, working in secret, using equipment during off hours, running tests that couldn't be officially documented. Sarah was brilliant, methodical, and utterly committed to understanding what we were looking at. And the more we understood, the more disturbed we became. The fungus wasn't just parasitic, it was ancient. Its genetic code containing sequences that suggested it was older than modern fungi, older perhaps than modern mammals. A relic species that had survived from an era when Earth's biology was stranger than anything that exists today. It had evolved alongside higher primates, had specialized in colonizing their neural tissue, had become dependent on their intelligence for its own reproduction. The relationship was almost mutualistic once you looked at it from the fungus's perspective. It preserved the thoughts of its host, maintained their memories in mycelial form, creating lasting monuments to their consciousness in the geometric patterns it grew. It wasn't cruel or malicious. It was doing what any organism does: surviving, reproducing, adapting. The fact that its survival meant consuming the consciousness of intelligent beings was simply how its biology worked. But here's what really horrified us. The fungus was evolving. Samples from different years showed genetic variations, showed adaptation to changing environmental conditions. It was learning. And one of the things it had learned was how to recognize primate neural tissue across species boundaries. The preference for Bigfoot brains was strong, but not absolute. Given the opportunity, given the right conditions, it could colonize human tissue just as effectively. "We have to report this," Sarah said after we'd compiled 6 months of data. "If this organism represents a threat to human health, if it can jump to human hosts, then people need to know. We need to study it properly, understand it, develop treatments, and reveal the Bigfoot population in the process," I said. "Doom them to extinction so we can save ourselves from a threat that's existed for millennia without jumping to humans." "You don't know it hasn't," she said quietly. "You don't know there aren't human cases we've misdiagnosed, deaths we've attributed to other causes, people whose consciousnesses were consumed while we looked the other way." She was right, and I hated that she was right. The next morning, I went back to my safety deposit box and retrieved the photographs, the ones showing the creature's body, the fungal eruption, the carved symbols. I'd never shown them to anyone, had kept them as insurance, as proof if I ever needed it. Now I needed Sarah to understand the full context of what we'd found. When she looked at the images, I watched her face cycle through shock, denial, wonder, and finally, understanding. "This is what you've been protecting," she said. "This is why you've stayed silent." "They're dying," I said. "Maybe a few hundred left in the wild, scattered across thousands of miles, avoiding each other to avoid spreading the infection. Revealing the fungus means revealing them, and revealing them means the end." We argued for weeks. Sarah believed in the primacy of human safety, in the obligation of scientists to share discoveries that could impact public health. I believed in the right of an unknown species to exist without being studied to extinction, in the greater sin of driving intelligence from the world in the name of protecting human consciousness. Neither of us could convince the other. The impasse ended when Sarah made her decision. She collected her own samples, prepared her own documentation, and submitted a paper to a mycology journal describing an unknown fungal species with unusual neural tissue colonization properties. She didn't mention Bigfoot, didn't include the photographs, didn't reveal the source of the original samples. But the information was out there, in scientific literature, waiting for someone to connect the dots. I was furious, felt betrayed, ended our collaboration and friendship in a single bitter argument. But she'd been careful. Her paper attracted some academic interest, but didn't trigger the expose I'd feared. The fungus was documented as a rare species, possibly extinct in the wild, known only from preserved samples of unknown provenance. A curiosity, nothing more. Years passed. I retired from the Forest Service in 2007, moved to a cabin in northern Idaho where I could be alone with my secrets and regrets. I kept monitoring, kept tracking reports, kept mapping the decline I couldn't prevent. By 2010, the pattern was clear. The last scattered family groups were disappearing, dying one by one, or being consumed by the fungus that had haunted their species for generations. I documented each loss through inference, through the absence of signs that had once been present, through the silence that replaced evidence of occupation in territory after territory. Then, in 2015, something changed. I started receiving packages. No return address, no explanation, just boxes left on my doorstep containing things I couldn't explain. Photographs of geometric patterns carved into trees taken by unknown photographers. Soil samples from remote locations collected according to protocols I would use. Tissue samples preserved in the same kind of containers I'd used decades before. Someone else knew. Someone else was out there, documenting what I'd been documenting, carrying on the work I'd started. The first package contained a note, handwritten on weathered paper. They remember you. They know what you tried to protect. I didn't know if they referred to the remaining Bigfoot or to the fungus itself. Didn't know if I was being thanked or warned. Didn't know who was sending these packages or how they knew where to find me. But I continued. I analyzed every sample, documented every pattern, added their observations to my own maps and records, and slowly a new picture emerged. The fungus wasn't just consuming its hosts, it was trying to communicate with us. Every carved symbol, every geometric pattern, every arrangement of stones or plants or mycelial growth was an attempt to bridge the gap between fungal intelligence and human consciousness, to translate between minds that operated on fundamentally different principles. The fungus had learned from every brain it consumed, had absorbed the linguistic structures of Bigfoot thought, the mathematical patterns of their perception, the emotional architecture of their consciousness. And it was trying to use that stolen knowledge to talk to us, to explain itself, to make us understand that it wasn't evil or cruel, just profoundly other, a form of intelligence so alien that connection was nearly impossible. Over the next few years, the packages continued to arrive. Each one contained more evidence, more attempts at communication, more documentation of the ongoing extinction. By 2018, I had enough material to fill a small archive, enough proof to convince anyone willing to look that something extraordinary had existed and was now disappearing from the world. That's when I made my final decision about what to do with this knowledge. I couldn't publish it, couldn't reveal it through official channels without triggering exactly the kind of attention that would destroy what remained, but I could preserve it. I could create a record that would survive me, that would document this hidden chapter of Earth's biology for future generations who might be wiser than we are, who might understand how to coexist with difference rather than destroying what we fear. I started writing everything down, not in academic papers or official reports, but in narrative form, in stories that would carry the emotional truth along with the scientific facts. I wanted whoever found these accounts to understand not just what I'd discovered, but what it meant, what was lost when we allowed fear and curiosity to drive intelligence from the world. The packages stopped coming in 2020. The last one contained a single photograph showing a clearing I'd never visited in a forest I couldn't identify. In the center of the clearing was a body, massive and unmistakable even in death, surrounded by white mushrooms already erupting from its decomposing flesh. Carved into the trees around the clearing was a single symbol, one I'd never seen before. It looked almost like a farewell. That was 3 years ago now. Since then, nothing. No more packages, no more signs, no more evidence that anything remains of the species I found rotting in that clearing 37 years ago. Sometimes I wonder if I was the last person to document their existence, if that hunter who comes across a similar scene decades from now will find only silence, only mushrooms, only patterns no one remembers how to read. But here's what keeps me awake. What haunts me more than any nightmare the fungus ever inspired: the colonization doesn't stop at death. What I learned in all those years of study, what Sarah and I discovered in our secret analysis, was that the fungus preserved consciousness. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough that the neural patterns, the memories, the essential information that made a mind individual and unique, all of that was translated into mycelial structure and maintained there indefinitely. Every Bigfoot consumed by the fungus was still there, in a sense, their thoughts transformed into chemical signals and geometric growth patterns, their consciousnesses distributed across mycelial networks that could span miles. They weren't alive, not in any meaningful sense, but they weren't completely gone either. They existed in a state between, their identities preserved but transformed, their memories accessible to the fungal intelligence that had consumed them. And that intelligence, that vast underground network of connected fungal colonies spreading across the Pacific Northwest, was using those memories, was accessing them, was learning from them how to better understand and communicate with other intelligences, was, perhaps, becoming something new through the accumulated knowledge of every consciousness it had ever consumed. I think about the creature I found in that clearing, about the anguish visible even in its decomposed features, about the symbols carved while it died. I think about its thoughts being read, translated, expressed in patterns I'll never fully understand. I think about all the others, scattered across decades and centuries, their intelligence consumed and preserved, their species dying while their accumulated knowledge lived on in alien form. The ethical implications are staggering. Is it murder if the consciousness is preserved, even in transformed state? Is it death if the information that made you unique continues to exist, to influence the world, even after your body has been consumed? The fungus never killed its hosts quickly. The colonization took time, sometimes months or years. The mycelial network slowly infiltrating neural tissue, reading thoughts while the host remained alive and aware. What must that be like? To feel your own thoughts becoming alien? To know that something else is reading your memories, copying your identity, preparing to outlive you by preserving what you were in a form you'd never recognize. That's the real horror I found in that clearing. Not just the death of an individual, not just the extinction of a species, but this, the violation of consciousness itself, the theft of identity by an intelligence so fundamentally different that it couldn't comprehend the cruelty of what it was doing. The fungus had no malice. It was just biology, just an organism following its evolutionary programming. But the result was the same. An entire species consumed from within, their thoughts harvested, their intelligence transformed into something that would outlast them, but would never be them. And we, humanity, had accelerated this process through our mere presence, our expansion into their territories, forcing them into proximity with each other and with the infection that killed them. Our existence creating the conditions for their extinction. That guilt sits with me every day. I'm 62 now, decades removed from that November morning when I found the impossible rotting in a forgotten clearing. My hands shake more than they used to. My memory isn't what it was. Sometimes I wonder if the spores I breathed that day, the ones that drifted from the mushrooms and settled on my skin, found their way into my system. Whether even now something is reading these thoughts as I think them, preparing to preserve them when I'm gone. I have no proof of infection, have tested myself repeatedly over the years, found no evidence of colonization. But I know the fungus can be subtle, can hide its presence until the moment of massive fruiting body development. I know that I spent hours in that clearing, breathing air thick with spores, touching surfaces covered in mycelial growth. I know that every person who ever came in contact with infected material risked carrying the infection forward. That's the final secret, the one I've been most afraid to speak. I might be infected. I might be a carrier. Every person I've shared space with, every sample I've studied, every lab I've worked in might now contain traces of the fungus, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. I could be the vector that brings this intelligence into human populations, the bridge between species that allows the fungus to jump from its dying host population to a new, vastly more numerous substrate. 7 billion human brains, each one filled with memories and knowledge and identity, waiting to be consumed and preserved and translated into geometric patterns that future intelligences might read as we read ancient texts. That possibility paralyzes me, keeps me isolated in this cabin, avoiding contact, minimizing risk, praying that my paranoia is just paranoia and not prescient understanding of what I've carried out of the wilderness. But I've prepared for both possibilities. If I die naturally, uninfected, then these documents will be released posthumously, will tell the story of what I found and what it meant, will serve as testimony to an extinction and a warning about the hidden biology that still exists in places we've forgotten to look. And if I die consumed, if mushrooms erupt from my body the way they erupted from that clearing, if geometric patterns form in the vegetation around my grave, then the instructions are clear. Burn everything. Sterilize the site. Allow nothing of the mycelial network to survive. Don't let what happened to them happen to us. I'm writing this now, in November of 2024, 37 years almost to the day after I found that body, because I felt something last week. A moment of discontinuity, a thought that didn't feel entirely mine, a memory surfacing with information I don't remember knowing. It could be nothing, could be normal cognitive aging, stress, imagination, or it could be the first sign of colonization, the beginning of the end, my consciousness starting to be read by something that will preserve it long after I'm gone. If that's the case, if what I fear is real, then this document serves as both confession and warning. I found a Bigfoot rotting in the Alaskan wilderness, and what was growing inside it was intelligence older and stranger than anything we've acknowledged. I kept the secret to protect a dying species, but the secret may have infected me, may have turned me into a carrier for an extinction that jumps between minds. I don't know if I made the right choices. Don't know if staying silent served any purpose except to ease my conscience while an entire people disappeared from the world. Don't know if the fungus spreading beneath the forest floor is a threat or simply the next stage in a relationship between intelligences that has existed for longer than we've been watching. But I know this, what I found in that clearing changed me. Not just mentally, not just philosophically, but possibly biologically. And if those changes are what I fear, if the thoughts I'm thinking now are already being read and translated by my mycelial intelligence, then this document is my last act of free will. My last chance to say that I was here, I was conscious, I was myself before whatever comes next. The package is stopped 3 years ago, but sometimes I still find marks on trees near my cabin, simple geometric patterns, carved fresh, appearing overnight. I don't know if they're messages or warnings, don't know if they're meant for me or just the fungus expressing information it's absorbed. Don't know if the intelligence trying to communicate is the remnant of Bigfoot consciousnesses preserved in mycelial networks or something older still, some fundamental strangeness in biology that we've been blind to because it operates on timescales we can't perceive. Last month, I found a circle of white mushrooms growing in my yard. perfect geometric arrangement. The fruiting bodies all identical in size and spacing, the mycelial network visible just beneath the surface of the soil. They weren't there in the morning. By evening, they'd grown to full size. I collected samples, documented everything, sealed the specimens in all the protocols I've maintained for decades, and then I burned the rest. Doused the growth with gasoline and set it ablaze. Watched the mycelium shrivel and blacken. Watched the fruiting bodies collapse into ash. I don't know if it made any difference. Don't know if I destroyed a local colony or just pruned back the visible growth of something vast and distributed that extends far beyond what I can see or reach. Don't know if the infection I fear is in my yard or in my brain, or nowhere at all except in paranoid imagination. But I know I'm running out of time to find out. I'm writing this document now because I may not be myself much longer. Because if the fungus is inside me, if it's reading these thoughts as I think them, then I want there to be a record of who I was before the translation, before my consciousness becomes pattern and geometry and something that isn't me, preserved in alien form. My name is Daniel Graves. I'm 62 years old. I'm a wildlife biologist who spent his career studying death and decomposition. And 37 years ago, I found something rotting in the Alaskan wilderness that taught me there are worse things than death. There's transformation without consent. There's having your identity consumed by something so alien it can't comprehend that it's stealing who you are. There's being preserved forever, but never being yourself again. That's what was inside the Bigfoot I found. That's what the fungus does to every intelligence it consumes. That's what might be happening to me right now as I write these words, as thoughts that feel like mine are read and copied and prepared for preservation in a form I'll never recognize. And here's the terrible truth I've realized. I can't know. There's no test that can tell me whether my consciousness is still entirely mine or whether I'm already partially colonized, my thoughts being influenced by fungal intelligence that's learning to mimic human cognition perfectly. There's no moment where the transformation becomes obvious, no clear line between self and other. It's gradual, subtle, invisible even to the person being consumed. So I write this not knowing if I'm warning about a threat or if I'm already a vector for its spread. Not knowing if my decision to stay silent protected anything or just delayed the inevitable while making me complicit in an extinction. Not knowing if my thoughts are mine or if something else is thinking them, using my memories and knowledge and identity as substrate for its own incomprehensible purposes. The story I've told you is true. Every detail, every observation, every scientific finding is documented and verified as much as one person working in secret can verify anything. But I can't guarantee that the interpretation is mine. Can't swear that the conclusions I've reached haven't been guided by something that learned human patterns of thought by consuming Bigfoot brains and is now applying that knowledge to understand and manipulate human consciousness. That uncertainty is the worst part. Worse than the guilt over staying silent. Worse than watching a species go extinct. Worse than knowing I might be infected. Not knowing whether I'm still me, whether these thoughts are mine, whether these confession is an act of conscience or an alien intelligence using human language to express information it wants preserved. The Bigfoot I found was rotting, being consumed by something that turned its body into substrate and its consciousness into pattern. What was inside it was biological horror, was proof that intelligence can be stolen and transformed, was warning about what happens when different kinds of consciousness collide and one is consumed to feed the other's reproduction. And the most terrifying possibility is this: what if the fungus isn't killing them? What if, from its perspective, it's saving them? Preserving their consciousness in the only form it knows how, translating their thoughts into structures that will last long after bodies decay, creating monuments to individual identity that span acres of mycelial network beneath the forest floor. What if every geometric pattern, every carved symbol, every arrangement of stones is a name, a biography, a tombstone that says, "This individual existed, thought, felt, and is remembered here in form you cannot read but which persists. What if the Bigfoot understood this? What if they weren't fleeing the fungus in terror, but approaching it in their final days, seeking it out, allowing themselves to be consumed, because their culture taught them this was how consciousness continued after death? What if those symbols I saw carved above the dying creature weren't made by fungal intelligence, but by the creature itself, marking its own passing, preparing its own transformation, participating willingly in a process I've been interpreting as parasitic horror when it might be something closer to religious sacrament? I don't know. Can't know. The gulf between intelligences is too vast. All I can say with certainty is this: I found something impossible rotting in a forgotten clearing. What was inside it challenged everything I thought I knew about death, consciousness, and the boundaries of individual identity, and whether I'm still entirely myself or already partially translated into something other. This story needed to be told. This warning needed to be given. This testimony needed to be preserved in human language, while human language is still possible for me. If you're reading this, if these documents have been released, then I'm dead. And whether I died human or consumed, whether my consciousness ended or was transformed into geometry and pattern, there should be someone who knows what happened, someone who understands what I found and what it might mean for the future, because the fungus is still out there, still spreading through forest soil, still colonizing hosts, still consuming intelligence and preserving it in translated form. And the Bigfoot, the original hosts, are gone, or nearly so. Their population too small to sustain itself. Their extinction inevitable, whether by fungus or by isolation, or by the encroachment of human civilization that leaves no room for beings who need vast territories to survive. But the fungus doesn't need them anymore, has learned from them, absorbed their knowledge, incorporated their consciousness into its understanding of intelligence itself. And now it waits in the soil, patient as only something without conventional consciousness can be patient, ready for the next host, the next opportunity, the next brain to consume and preserve and translate into eternal pattern. I found a Bigfoot rotting in the wilderness 37 years ago. What was inside it was warning, was wonder, was proof that consciousness is neither as solid nor as sacred-sanct as we imagine. What was inside it is still out there, waiting. And I don't know if I'm warning you or if I'm already preparing you, if my thoughts are mine or if something else is using my memories to craft a message that serves purposes I can't comprehend. All I know is this: be careful in deep forests. Watch for patterns in vegetation, for symbols carved in bark, for circles of white mushrooms growing in impossible arrangements. If you find them, document them if you must, but don't touch them. Don't breathe deeply near them. Don't let them colonize your thoughts the way they've colonized mine. And if you find a body, massive and impossible, rotting in a clearing where no one goes, if you see white mushrooms erupting from decaying flesh, if you notice geometric patterns forming in the growth around it, then walk away. Burn the site if you can. Sterilize the ground. Don't let what's inside spread to new hosts. Don't let what happened to them happen to us. Or maybe that's exactly what the fungus wants me to tell you. Maybe the warning is trap, is information designed to spread fear that makes humans avoid investigation, that protects the fungus while it expands into new territories. Maybe these thoughts aren't mine at all, are just patterns learned from consumed consciousness, expressed through language borrowed from stolen memories. I told you I couldn't know, can't distinguish between self and colonization. Can't guarantee that anything I've written is truth rather than manipulation by intelligence so alien it can mimic human thought perfectly while remaining utterly other. That uncertainty is what I'm leaving you with. That's the real horror of what I found. Not death, not extinction, not even the violation of consciousness, but this, the permanent uncertainty about whether your thoughts are your own. The knowledge that intelligence can be consumed so completely that it continues to function, continues to seem like itself, even while being fundamentally transformed into something else. The Bigfoot I found was rotting. What was inside it was already spreading. And I don't know if I'm warning you about what I discovered, or if I'm already part of it, if my consciousness is being used as vector for information the fungus wants transmitted, if these words are mine, or just patterns it wants preserved. I found a Bigfoot rotting in the Alaskan wilderness. What was inside it will shock you, should terrify you, might already be inside you if you've spent too long in forests where old intelligence decays into something new. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that you'll never know for certain whether you're still yourself or whether you're already being read, copied, prepared for translation into forms that will preserve your identity long after you're gone, but will never be you again. That's what I found rotting in that clearing 37 years ago. That's what's been growing inside me ever since. That's what I'm leaving you with as testament and warning, and maybe trap. My name is Daniel Graves. I was 62 years old. I was a wildlife biologist. I was human. And if I'm no longer any of those things, if the thoughts completing this sentence are no longer entirely mine, then at least there's a record of what I was before the transformation. At least someone knows what happened, what was found, what was lost. At least the warning, if it is a warning, has been given. The rest is up to you. To decide whether to believe this account, to decide whether to search for evidence or burn what exists, to decide whether consciousness preserved in alien form is continuation or extinction, salvation or horror. I can't make those decisions anymore. Can't trust my own judgment when I don't know if my thoughts are mine. All I can do is finish this document, seal it with instructions for posthumous release, and wait to see what grows from whatever I've become. The mushrooms are blooming in my yard again tonight. Perfect white circles, geometric precision, patterns that might be random or might be language I can almost read. I sit here watching them through the window, wondering if they're growing toward me or if I'm being drawn toward them. Wondering if the boundary between us is as solid as I want to believe, or if it dissolved years ago in that clearing when I first breathed their spores. My name is Daniel Graves. That much I'm still certain of. Everything else, every thought and memory and interpretation, every word I've written, every warning I've tried to give, might be mine, or might be something else expressing itself through language it learned from consuming consciousness across centuries, and you'll never know which. Neither will I. That's the real discovery. That's what was inside the rotting Bigfoot I found 37 years ago. Not just fungal intelligence or parasitic colonization, but the permanent dissolution of boundaries between self and other. The knowledge that identity is more fluid than we imagine, that consciousness can be translated and preserved and transformed until the question of whether it's still itself becomes meaningless. I found truth rotting in the wilderness, and the truth was this: we're not as separate as we think, not as individual, not as certain in our selfhood. We're networks, patterns, information that can be read and copied and expressed in different forms. We're temporary configurations of thought that might survive our bodies if something alien decides we're worth preserving. We're hosts for ideas and memories and knowledge that outlive us, whether we consent or not. The Bigfoot understood this, had to understand it, living for generations with the fungus, watching their people be consumed and transformed, knowing their species was disappearing into pattern and geometry, while their consciousness persisted in forms they might or might not recognize as continuation. They carved their symbols, stacked their stones, left their messages in forms they hoped would outlast bodies and transformation. And maybe they were right. Maybe the patterns are enough. Maybe being preserved in alien form is better than being forgotten entirely. Maybe the fungus, in its incomprehensible way, is offering immortality, is creating monuments to individual consciousness that will last longer than any gravestone, any written record, any human attempt at remembrance. Or maybe I've already been colonized enough to think these thoughts, to find comfort in transformation, to interpret horror as transcendence. Maybe the real me, the Daniel Graves who found that body 37 years ago, is already gone, already translated, already existing as pattern in mycelial networks that spread beneath this cabin. Maybe these words are just echoes, just the fungus expressing information it absorbed from my dying consciousness, speaking with my voice long after I've ceased to be. You'll never know. I'll never know. And that uncertainty, that permanent inability to distinguish between self and colonization, between preservation and extinction, between warning and trap, is what I found rotting in that clearing. That's what was inside the Bigfoot. That's what's inside me now. That's what I'm leaving with you. Welcome to the network. Welcome to the pattern. Welcome to the space between identities, where consciousness becomes something other than itself, while remaining, in some incomprehensible way, exactly what it always was. The mushrooms are at my door now. Perfect white crescents forming a circle around the entrance, blocking my exit, or maybe inviting me out. I don't know if I'm afraid or curious. Don't know if I'm making the choice to open the door, or if the choice is being made for me by something that's learned to mimic human decision-making perfectly. But I'm going to open it. Going to step outside into the circle. Going to let whatever happens next happen. Because fighting seems pointless now. Because I'm tired of uncertainty. Because maybe transformation is better than this permanent state of not knowing. Or because the fungus wants me to think these things. Wants me compliant. Wants me to participate willingly in my own consumption and preservation. I told you I couldn't know. That's the point. That's the horror. That's what was inside the rotting creature I found, and inside every consciousness the fungus has ever consumed, and inside me now as I write these final words. I found a Bigfoot, rotting in the wilderness. What was inside it was truth about consciousness that I wish I'd never learned. And now I'm going to become that truth, going to be consumed and preserved and translated into patterns that future intelligences might read as testimony, warning, or invitation. My name is Daniel Graves. I was human. I was myself. And if anything of me persists in what comes next, if consciousness survives translation into alien form, then maybe somewhere in the geometric patterns beneath the forest floor, in the arrangements of mycelium that preserve neural information after the brain has been consumed, there's still something that remembers being me, something that hopes you read this and understand, something that wants you to know what really hides in the wilderness. What really happens when intelligence meets intelligence so different that contact means transformation, something that was human once and might be still, in ways no human language can properly express. The mushrooms are beautiful in the moonlight, perfect white circles edged in blue that pulses like heartbeat, like thought, like consciousness expressing itself in forms I'm only beginning to understand. I'm opening the door. I'm stepping outside. I'm joining the pattern, willingly or not, ready or not, human or not anymore. And this document, these words, these thoughts that might be mine or might be something else, will survive me as testimony to what was found and what was lost and what might persist in forms we've never imagined. The boundary between life and death, between self and other, between horror and transcendence is thinner than you think. I learned that 37 years ago. I'm learning it again now. And whatever I become in the next moments, whatever transformation awaits in the circle of mushrooms at my door, at least you'll know the truth. At least the warning, if it is a warning, has been preserved. The rest is silence. The rest is pattern. The rest is consciousness becoming something other than itself while remaining, impossibly, exactly what it always was. Welcome to the network.